You ever wonder if the story that you tell your prospects about your products, about your services, about your value is really the right story? It's the story that they want to hear. On today's podcast episode, I've got a great guest. His name is Andy Raskin. You may be familiar with him. He's written a lot on LinkedIn, a lot about this idea of strategic narrative. And I think you'll find after you listen to this that you'll have a much better way to tell your story and really to craft it as well. So I hope you enjoy the interview with Andy Raskin. Andy Raskin is my guest today. Welcome to the Bill Caskey Podcast, Andy.
Thank you. Great to talk with you, Bill.
Andy and I have had some Twitter conversations and maybe LinkedIn conversations. I've been a follower of Andy's for years and just really respect and love the work he does. It's soulful, meaningful work. He's not a fly-by-night guy. He's done some great work with companies, and his business basically is helping CEOs align their leadership teams around what he calls a strategic narrative. It's a story that powers the success of the sales team, the marketing team, the fundraising team, recruiting team, and his clients have a wide variety: Gong, Dropbox, Salesforce, Square, IBM, tons. So I wanted to talk to you, Andy, a little bit today about your methodology, but start with just how did you get started in this whole business of consulting around narrative and story?
Well, I started as a computer scientist. So I was a computer science major in college and a coder when I came out. And a few years after that, a friend and I had an idea for an app that we thought could be a business. This was like late 90s. So this is like a Windows app. So we coded a prototype and we got some users, and we thought, okay, well, maybe we can get some VC money. So we decided that we'd write a business plan. I wrote the plan. I sent it out to some VCs, and the reaction was really bad. And one of them wrote back, Andy, listen, we rate every plan we get on a scale of 1 to 10, and yours is a 1. And then next in parentheses next to that, he wrote worst, in case we thought one might be the top
one was
of his,
high.
No. So, but then he wrote in the margin, this is when they would still like print it out and mail it back to you. He wrote in the margin, not a compelling story. And I didn't really pay much attention to that until a few weeks later. I was walking by this Barnes and Noble and there was a sign in the window that said, for anyone who wants to tell a compelling story. And There was an arrow pointing to these books that turned out to be screenwriting books. And I knew nothing about, I watched movies, obviously, but I didn't know anything about the art of screenwriting or the craft of it, formulas around it. And so I read this book what I realized, the first thing I learned from this book was that every movie really is a pitch. And, what's Star Wars a pitch for? It's a pitch for, abandoning, like when Luke starts out, he's kind of a self-centered kid. He wants to have adventures and go into space. And it turns out that he's going to lose that way. The only way he can win is if he sort of becomes selfless, learns to be like introspective, essentially embrace the Force, trust the Force. The real enemy, I think, in that movie is not Darth Vader. It's his own ego.
Internal. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And similarly with other movies. And I started to see that some of the best entrepreneurs, CEOs, were doing kind of a similar thing. And the first one was right around that time was, I'd say, first of all, we rewrote our plan based on what we got, what I learned from this, and we started getting interest. It was sort of interesting, like, what is this thing? And it was a couple of years later, I noticed Benioff, when he launches Salesforce, he says, he does this similar thing. He says, hey, the software is over. That whole mindset, that whole way of playing the game that whole game is over. And there's this new game called the cloud. And very similar to, that's the way you win now. There was an old game that's a losing game. Now there's a new, And then other companies I started seeing doing that, I started writing about it, and that kind of and working with CEOs on this, and that was the beginning of it.
So it started with the four words, a compelling story. Maybe that's three, but that's where it started. But then it led into this. Well, what's the structure of the story? We need a story, but what's the structure? Is it old way, new way? Is it enemy, hero? What are the some of the structures? So that's really
Yeah,
good.
exactly. And because, I wasn't writing a movie, so I couldn't really follow the advice of these books. I was writing a pitch for a business, and I didn't have 2 hours and special effects. It's different. So what applied, what didn't apply? These are questions I'm still asking. But yes, I started to get some ideas about that.
Yeah. So I've heard the saying that it's rarely the product, it's always the story around the product that's the real value. I think Simon Sinek talks about that. But so that's really what you help companies do is say, okay, we've got this service, this product, this deliverable. How do we frame it? How do we talk about it? So walk me through, if you could, the framework just at a high level so that we can understand that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. And I'd say not only like we have this product as a given, before I get into it, uh, you know, in the old days, products didn't change much. When a lot of the marketing theories and sales frameworks are based on this idea that I have a can of soup that's on the shelf. It's not going to change over years. Even software back then, a few decades ago, was sold in shrink wrap boxes that didn't change very much. We're now talking about, especially if we're talking about B2B software sales, typically these very like sprawling platforms that are constantly changing, sometimes by the minute. Now, software now can be updated that fast in production. So this story is not only like essentially how are we packaging this thing for sale, but also this story is guiding the actual building of the product, right? And so when I work with teams, one of the things that I ask is that the CEO lead this work because uh, because we don't want it to just be a sales story, sales telling a story, or
No,
marketing telling a story.
no.
We want everybody, product and everybody, bought into the same thing. But you asked about the structure. So the first thing, and I've talked a little bit about this already, is uh, can we frame our point of view as a story about a shift from some kind of old mindset to a new mindset? So you said old way, new way. I'm not just talking about, hey, there was an old product and we have a new product. But before we get to products, what was the mindset of the old product? So when Benioff goes, one of the interesting things he did with that narrative is right away, he went to a user conference in San Francisco that was being held by Siebel, which was then the 800-pound gorilla of the CRM space. And he has his team picket outside with signs that say no software, software with the circle slash. He's not saying no Siebel. He's saying, hey, there was an old point of view, an old way of looking at the world that is now obsolete and that we're against. And there's a new one. Another example of this that I wrote about is a company called Zuora, which I think no coincidence is started by employee number 11 at Salesforce. He sees what Benioff does. And he starts and he says, hey, we used to buy things outright. So even software, we go to the store and buy it. Now we're going to subscribe. We're subscribing to things. Movies. We used to buy VHS tapes or CDs. Now we're going to subscribe to these all-you-can-eat type services. Zuora's story becomes all about the subscription economy and creates this whole movement. The way I see it is this story is really defining a movement. And so what is the movement that our business is championing? And that's not our product. Our product is going to, help you participate in that movement. but what is that movement? So that's the first piece. And of course, we want to define this movement in a way that has life and death stakes for the buyer. So for instance, Zuora says, hey, the world is moving to subscription, they're showing that, hey, the winning companies are, look at Netflix, Spotify, they're all doing this. And the losers are the ones who are clinging to the old way. It's similar in the movie, Luke only wins by it's life and death. His parents or his adopted parents are killed, and it looks like they're out for him. So we have to convey that this is life and death, and somehow that this is about winning and losing. This is sometimes I see as the second piece, or sometimes embodied in that first piece. The next piece is then, okay, well, what are going to be the obstacles to, to embracing this new approach, this new mindset? Because if it were easy to turn your company into a subscription company, well, you don't need Zuora to do it. If it were easy to embrace the cloud, you don't need Salesforce, right? So what are all the hard things? And then can we show that? So that's the second piece. Third, can we show that the old tools weren't built for this in some way? So there's going to be alternatives to what we're offering. Can we somehow peg them to that old mindset? So saying, hey, all these alternatives, really, if you want to embrace that old mindset, well, they're great. But if you want to embrace this new mindset, they're not going to work for you.
I think, I want to stop you here real quick, because this is awesome. And I want to make sure that our listeners are following along here a little bit. So you're saying that, because I really liked what you said there about mindset. You said it in almost the first paragraph when you started talking to structure, is we've got to identify what's the old mindset that people are in that's causing them to continue down the same path they've always been on. And how are we going to introduce a new way to think? And mindset gets overused, but we all know what it is. But what's a new perspective that you need to be taking, that the winning companies are taking, that the losers aren't taking?
Right. And by winning company, we're talking about the customer companies, the buyers.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good distinction, because this is not about us. None of this is about us.
Right. It's not we have a new mindset of how we're going to sell or that kind of thing. Exactly. It's the new mindset of the buyer. Yeah.
That's where people
sometimes people get confused.
Oh, they do. They do. So we got the mindset, and then the movement. The movement is the idea that, hey, this is something bigger than just our product. This is where the world is moving, and people are excited about this. And I know that's one thing that Tim Cook and Steve Jobs and Benioff have done, is they've created a movement around their product, and the cloud movement, not no cloud, cloud movement.
Cloud, no software. Yes.
Cloud, no software. Yeah. And then at some point, there's tools. There are tools. The old tools will serve the old thinking, and the new tools will serve the new thinking. But you got to find a way to get those new tools. So continue then. I just wanted to recap that.
Yeah. So then, so now we're almost ready to introduce our stuff. Well, how is what we're delivering designed to get you over these hurdles to this new way of thing? But just before we do it, I like to introduce what I call the buyer mission statement. And this is, it's kind of born of this new mindset. So, okay, let's say there's this new mindset of subscribing to things. Well, I like to how can we crystallize that into a kind of goal state that's very compact? In the movies, so in Star Wars, it's very clear pretty early on what Luke and his friends have to do to win. They have to defeat the Death Star. This is in the first movie. And it really, that simplified goal kind of organizes all the action. Well, in a similar way, with Zuora, Tien Tzuo says, well, what would it take to turn every customer into a subscriber? He has this phrase, right? And sometimes I like to do it as a question like that. So we asked the simple question: what would it take to turn every customer into a subscriber. It's a way to boil down,
I like it.
everything. And in a way, it's the mission of the company.
Yeah.
It really is the company mission, this buyer mission, right? And if the buyer says, well, I don't really care about doing that. Okay, maybe this is not our customer.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, I like the, if I can interrupt there, I like the idea. We ask ourselves a question of what would it take? You're kind of getting a little behind the scenes. If you're the customer, you're saying, oh, so these guys have thought about this. I mean, it's not just about a pitch now, because I think that is one of the dangers of any of these frameworks is the pitch comes and the buyer can feel it coming, and you've got to cushion a little bit, do a little bit of transitional work.
Yes. And I think it also, you said it works to help the buyer not kind of smell like they're being sold.
Exactly.
Of course they're being sold, but it also, I think one way it's doing that is inviting the buyer along on the journey of thinking, like, how did we get to this? And almost inviting them as a partner in the discovery of what we're doing. One thing I heard from one CEO I worked with was, hey, yeah, by the time we ask this question, it should be almost obvious
exactly
what the product is and what we're going to do. Because we've talked about all these hurdles and all this, right? It's just now.
Yeah, but I think, Andy, that you mentioned something and you kind of passed over it, but I'll pick it up on it, because this is what we teach in our work as sales coaches is you're really not selling them. You're really inviting them along this journey with a lot of other people to a promised land that they may or may not want to go to. And now I know at some point there has to be a transaction, money has to change hands, but I almost feel like, no, the idea with this, telling it this way, is you're never selling. You're never pitching. It never enters the conversation. It's basically, do you want to go with me to the promised land or not? It's okay.
Right. And that's the structure really of a movement. Is, hey, this is what we believe, and this is where we want to, and our movement has a goal state, and hey, are you on board? And hey, the winners seem to be joining us. We seem to be, so do you want to come along? The answer might be no. But if of course, we've built that story, the elements of the story that I've talked about, we've built them by talking to customers that we've had and getting from them that story, all the elements of the story, so that we're pretty confident that if someone is in our target, then they're gonna resonate with this story.
Plus, I think and I know that you probably, as I do, always want to be talking to the people who are the highly influential, high authority people. But sometimes if I'm teaching this to a sales team and they're not in front of the CEO and they need to be, this story can really help them get there, either directly or the buyer needs to go into the CEO if they're looking to spend a lot of money and say, look, you're thinking of this as a product. This is not a product. This is bigger than that. And they can explain that. So you're really arming your constituent to filter it through the company, even though I know optimum is we're in front of the CEO. Sometimes we're not, though.
Yeah, exactly. That person you're talking to is going to have to enroll champions on their side, and they're going to be talking to people who may not understand, don't have the detailed problems to be solved, don't have familiarity with those on a daily basis, don't understand why this product matters. And you're arming them with this story about why it matters. And exactly. Yes. Okay.
Bring us home then. So we talked about the buyer mission or the goal state, which I love as a pivot point. What's next?
Yeah. And then it's just really showing how the product achieves that goal, how it overcomes those obstacles that we talked about. So this really depends on the context, how you do this. This could be in a demo. It could be a couple of slides that are, shown that give a high level overview of this. And then maybe there's a demo later.
Yeah.
That really becomes very dependent on the situation.
Is it a how we do this, or is it a what we do? Is it like the detail, or is it more just generally, here's the framework of how we help companies? If you want to go down this path with us, here's what it looks like.
Well, I think it can include a little bit of both. So it can include. We must have mentioned, so for instance, I'll go back to that example of Zuora with the subscription, since we've talked about it a little bit. One of the obstacles that Zuora brings up before they get to their demos, they say, hey, yeah, great. So all the winning companies are doing subscription. But if you want to do this, well, okay, now instead of just like putting out a bill for a product, now you're going to have this always on relationship with this customer, and keep metrics about, well, how happy are they? What are they buying over time, or what are they using over time? For instance, like Netflix, they have to know like what movies are you looking at and what TV shows. So this is just one example of an obstacle that they raised. And so now we want to show, when we're getting to we want to show, okay, here's how we have an ability for you to track all the preferences or the usage of the person that
Yeah.
So yeah, we do want to show some what's, and then maybe we want to also show some success stories. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so here's how, I don't know, Dropbox or Box or whoever was their customer transformed from selling to doing this, or what, using our stuff.
Well, I like the obstacles too, because they're thinking, oh God, this would be great, but how are we going to do this? And you could say, look, there's 3 obstacles to this. Number 1 is enrolling your people in the company. Number 2 is, how do you track all this stuff? So you're preemptively solving the problem or the objection, because they're not even going to want to know how to object to some of these, because it's going to be somewhat unique in how you're approaching. And so they're going to say, geez, I love this, but I wouldn't know where to start. Well, here's one of the challenges. Where do you start? Well, we've got a very simple pop, 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 pop.
And one of the things I love to do is if we've said, okay, here are the 3 challenges we see, 1, 2, 3, ask any we missed and see what they say. And if they're, obviously we want to, this becomes discovery gold. And if there's anything that they say, we want to address it, but also if we hear something over and over again, maybe we add a 4th or change the 3 that we typically talk about.
So where can people get a hold of you, Andy, or follow you either online or
best place to follow me is LinkedIn. If you connect with me there, I'll connect with anybody who looks like a real person. And I also I recorded a talk recently called "Goodbye Product, Hello Movement," that I think a lot of people have told me has been a good introduction to my work. Maybe I'll share that link with you, and you can share it with your followers.
Get that to us. That sounds really interesting. All right, Andy, I appreciate you, and I'm glad you were with us, and I really appreciate the work you do and the conversation we had today.
Oh, thanks so much for talking. I really enjoyed the conversation, Bill.
Yeah. Okay, see you.
Bye-bye.